Hello again, fellow infidels. We find ourselves here once again, dealing with Asshat. This is the last time I intend on doing this. He's recently released a couple more videos. One of them still doesn't make an argument, but he tries, and I guess that's all we can really ask of him. And the other one, surprise, surprise, yet more baseless insults. So, what I'm going to do here, since he continually says how shallow I am, how I don't understand things, or how I just babble on like an idiot, not addressing his points, what I'm going to do is, with that first video, I'm going to deconstruct it, argument by argument, and actually address the things he's saying in all seriousness. But then we're going to get to the second video. That's where the fun's going to begin. You see, I have a bit of a surprise, and, well, bear with me. This is going to be a longer one, but believe me, the payoff is going to be worth it. So, without further ado, let's get into his first of two videos.
Anasharak Amhotep. Hello YouTube, good morning. It is a beautiful day in San Jose, California. We are near the Egyptian Museum. It's a place for somebody like me to be, because you can tell ancient Egypt is very much a part of my life.
If by very much a part of your life you mean you say you worship Isis and you wear that shiny necklace of yours, then yeah, it's very much a part of your life. If you mean very much a part of your life in the way anyone else's culture is very much a part of their life, you have no idea what you're talking about. You live in San Jose, California, or at least around San Jose, California. You don't live in Egypt. You live near a museum. You don't know firsthand what ancient Egyptian culture was like. You have history books, but try as you might, you are not an ancient Egyptian. It is impossible for you to be an ancient Egyptian. The same way it would be impossible for me to be a true Druid, or an ancient Roman, or an ancient Greek. Those cultures do not exist anymore. They have been resurrected, in a way, in some of the neo-pagan movements, but they are not the original cultures. And you are not a part of ancient Egypt. Continue.
Actually, I am a priest of the goddess Isis, and my liturgical name is Harusa Asshat. As to my real name, you can read it here in my credential. There you go.
Oh, so your name is Mark. Or at least that's what I'm going to assume, since your finger is covering up the first letter. And the person who issued you that card is Loreon Vignier. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Keep that in mind, viewers. This is going to come up later.
And so, as a spiritual teacher, I can tell you I have my hands full, because in this day and age, spirituality, especially really ancient, advanced spirituality like there was back in ancient Egypt, is something so misunderstood and so unappreciated.
Ancient is an accurate descriptor for the religion of ancient Egypt. However, advanced, I'm wondering what your metric is. How do you determine what forms of spirituality are more advanced than others? You see, for most people, they consider polytheistic religions to be somehow less advanced, and they believe that monotheism, as supposedly practiced in the Abrahamic faiths, that is superior. Now, they have no reason to assert that either. My question is, how can you possibly measure which form of spirituality is more advanced? The honest answer is that you can't.
Ancient Egypt is still very much a culture that's very mysterious and very little known today. In spite of all the progresses made in archaeology, for example, when I see movies, videos, documentaries, TV shows on ancient Egypt, most of them are surprisingly riddled with inaccuracies.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about movies like the Mummy series, that's pretty obvious. Now, if you're talking about documentaries that you would see on, say, the Discovery Channel or the History Channel, or at least credible documentaries, I'm not talking like Ancient Aliens crap here. Again, I would like to see your data on this, why it's inaccurate information. There are plenty of mysteries involved in the ancient Egyptian society, but we're not completely ignorant of the way things happened in their society. We're not completely ignorant of their beliefs, their rituals, or anything like that. So, again, you seem to be presenting yourself as an intellectual authority here on the subject without giving us any reason to accept your claim, other than that little card that you showed off a little bit ago, which that doesn't really mean that you are extremely knowledgeable of ancient Egypt. That means you went through a correspondence course. Sure, it can take a couple of years to get, but it's still a mail-in correspondence course. At best, you went to the temple and took it there. There are people who study ancient Egypt their entire lives, have degrees on the subject, and you claim to know better than them?
The spirituality of ancient Egypt is something that's virtually impossible to understand unless you're part of it, unless you've been to the temple, or unless you've experienced it for yourself.
This is the same argument that Christians put forward about the Bible. They say that the Bible is actually impossible for a non-Christian to understand because God wrote it that way. You have to accept the Holy Spirit to understand the Bible for it to make sense to you. And both claims are equally vacuous. You see, you're, again, trying to claim intellectual superiority here, trying to claim some kind of experience without any way of proving that you've had this experience. And you say that it's impossible to understand unless you've experienced this. Plenty of people have experienced lots of things that aren't real. Experience is not evidence.
The ancient Egyptians knew very well that there's a big difference between empirical proof, as defined today in the modern world, proofs that you can write into a book and share with other people or make a lecture about even. Empirical proof versus that very personal experience of spiritual illumination.
Yes, there is a difference between empirical proof and personal experience. One is valid, and the other is personal experience. Remember how I said plenty of people have personally experienced other things that didn't happen? Let's go over a few of those, shall we?
My first abduction occurred in 1957 when I was 5 years old. Most of my abductions occurred very similarly in that they actually force me to crossbreed with what seems to be a female.
Even my pit bulls won't mess with him, they just buddies. But he lives here on the farm, and my son, you see how long the driveway is? My son says that Bigfoot will follow him through the woods over there. As he walks to the bus stop, Bigfoot will follow him through the woods. And he sees him every day.
Have you seen him?
Yeah, I've seen him several times.
My name is Kelly Wadsworth. On August 23rd of 1991, I saw Elvis Presley at Winesburg Inn in Clyde, Ohio.
Now, would you say that all of the claims that you just witnessed were valid because they were experienced by the people talking about them? Of course you wouldn't. That would be ludicrous. So, I ask you, why should your experiences be taken seriously when these other people's experiences are laughable?
When you will go on a spiritual quest and you will reach this very special moment when you have direct personal interaction with a higher power, with divinity. They called it Ditama. Ditama was a very life-altering experience. The ancient Egyptians also saw it as what it is, which is a great blessing.
The Christians see it as a blessing. The Jews see it as a blessing. The Muslims see it as a blessing. The Buddhists see it as a blessing. The Hindus see it as a blessing. The Druids saw it as a blessing. The Greeks saw it as a blessing. The Romans saw it as a blessing. And they all experienced something different. And none of them are compatible with the others. What is compatible with all of these experiences is self-delusion. Now, I'm not saying that everyone that experienced these things were crazy. Some of them, sure, probably were. Others delude themselves into feeling like they experienced something, when in fact they didn't, or at least not anything spiritual. Mind over matter is a very serious concept here, and basically, you believe something wholeheartedly enough, and your mind will provide it. It's not a spiritual phenomenon. We've measured how it happens. We actually can repeat the effects of it using, I believe they call it the God helmet. People put this thing on, and it actually is able to induce a state of feeling what people describe as divinity. It's just a brain state.
A blessing of any kind, actually, is something quite difficult to express or share with other people.
Meaning it's not evidence.
A good example is if you're lucky enough, if you're blessed enough to meet a wonderful woman who's going to change your life forever, and you will experience a level of happiness that's hard to conceive in this day and age. I mean, all you have to do is watch shows like Jerry Springer or Maury, like this, and you'll see it is quite difficult in the world of today to understand what it's like to be happily married, to find this perfect mate, soulmate for you. It's not a common occurrence in this day and age.
That last little bit has no bearing whatsoever on the conversation at hand. You making blanket statements about relationships in the modern world does not do anything to prove the validity of whether or not the spiritual world is real. Now, you say that the experience of love is similar to the experience of divinity. You claiming that because you feel the same way when worshiping Isis as you do when you see a beautiful woman or you see your wife, that doesn't prove that Isis is just as real as your wife. That just proves that your brain is capable of producing the chemicals that cause those emotions.
And so any blessing, any kind of special experience where you're blessed like this is just very difficult to understand or even begin to understand unless you have personally experienced it. This scene from the movie Casablanca was a good example to illustrate it.
And I'm just going to skip over your movie clips. Casablanca is a great film, but it has no bearing on the subject of spirituality. And you accuse me of ignoring your points. You're ignoring your own points here.
And so, blessing is not limited to spiritual illumination. And in the world of today, spirituality is taking a backseat. I mean, in the world of today where there's so much technocracy, so much materialism, only in a few places like maybe India or Thailand do people even begin to understand the concept of spiritual illumination.
If you think that India or Thailand are so much better because they understand spiritual illumination better than Western nations, feel free to go there. But I find it rather funny that you are using a camera hooked up to a computer which is connected to the internet, uploading videos to YouTube, complaining about technology and science. I don't even need to make a joke here. You're making it for me.
In the world of today, by contrast, spirituality is being misunderstood, belittled, and often ridiculed. I find it sad, if not disturbing, that today all you have to do is read magazines like this one, see?
You haven't purchased a different magazine yet?
Or watch some TV programs and debates on TV where many of these big-shot scientists, skeptics, and especially atheists scoff at religion, scoff at spirituality, scoff at anything paranormal. Only one problem: the things are so smart like this, but they're surprisingly shallow.
Asserting that someone is shallow does not make it so. Asserting that the supernatural exists does not make it so. Your entire argument thus far is baseless assertion backed up by unprovable personal experience. And you expect those kind of arguments to convince people when they're the exact same arguments that people have been using for every god throughout history. We atheists can be excused for not buying into your bull.
And by shallow, I really mean ignorance. Well, ignorance is never a good thing, first of all. You can be knowledgeable about what you're doing. I mean, these big-shot intellectuals, I give them credit. They know what they're talking about when it comes to science and other intellectual things. But when it comes to anything spiritual, ignorance is something quite important in their lives.
Demotivational posters? This is supposed to be convincing?
Actually, this is a pretty good one here. You probably recognize this charming face. However, in this particular case, instead of ignorance, I think inexperience would be a better word. Like I say, many of these big-shot scientists and skeptics have never experienced something like Ditama, never experienced that very special personal connection to a higher power.
Now you're trying to claim knowledge of the experiences of all of the people who disagree with you when you don't have any basis for making those claims. See, I haven't always been an atheist. I actually used to run around in neo-pagan circles, much like yourself. Never the Egyptian pantheon, but I toyed around with the Norse pantheon, a little bit of Greek. And I've always been fascinated by the Egyptian pantheon. I just never felt connected to it. However, when I was involved with the Norse gods, like I said, also some of the old Celtic ones, I felt very spiritually connected to them. I fully believed that, there was something. I was wrong. There wasn't. There never was. Now, do I regret those years? No. I started off my life actually in Christian circles and then moved away from that into the neo-pagan, the Wiccans and other such groups. But what really convinced me that I was wrong, that any of it was right, was the fact that the way I felt when I felt connected to the old Celtic spirituality, the Norse pantheon, the Greek pantheon, or even Christianity, it all felt the same, and it felt the same every time. Now, you tell me how that's supposed to convince me that any one of them was right.
And honestly, I find it a little amusing. People who are out there on TV or in magazines and just babbling about things they know nothing about. Frankly, it's downright amusing. But it's not always so amusing, though, when these people are out there trying to belittle religion, belittle spirituality, and even want to impose their views on others and saying that temples and churches and mosques should be destroyed, that religion should be eradicated. I don't find that amusing.
On this point, I actually have to agree with you. I don't necessarily think that temples, churches, and mosques should be destroyed. I don't necessarily think that spirituality should be eradicated. I think that the natural progression for human intelligence would eventually lead to the voluntary deconstruction of such establishments. I don't hope for anything violent, and I don't hope for any kind of imposition of my beliefs on anybody else. If you actually paid attention to anything political in the United States, what us atheists are doing is trying to stop people from imposing their religious beliefs on people who don't necessarily agree. And considering you are part of the neo-pagan group and not the majority Christian group, every atheist that fights for the separation of church and state, the freedom of religion, they're fighting for you as well. So for you to continually come onto YouTube and attack atheists as if we're the problem, that exposes a vast ignorance on your part.
And again, of course, you may want to try and talk to these people, talk some sense into them, and I've learned a long time ago, don't waste your time.
You learn not to waste your time talking to atheists? You've been pestering me for months.
Talking with someone who's got a big ego, who thinks, yeah, his viewpoint is out here on top of the mountain, and your viewpoint is out here in the gutter, it's not worth a try. I mean, it's really just an exercise in futility. All these atheist big shots, they're going to, well, bring your argument, present your argument, bring me some proof. I want proof.
That's what I've been saying from the start. Present your argument. Where's the proof? Are you calling me a big shot? I knew you'd warm up to me.
Unfortunately, it's not that simple.
Wrong. It is that simple. If you know something, if something is true, you can prove it. If you can't prove it, people can't be blamed for not thinking it's true. So, you say there is a spiritual realm. You say that this exists. I say again, prove it.
Because when you bring them proof or any arguments, they're just going to laugh at you, dismiss it as nonsense, and just say, oh no, there's another way to explain it.
If there's another way to explain it, and that explanation can be proven, then your explanation is incorrect. This is a very simple concept. Even someone like you should be able to understand this.
Another good example about that is when Thomas Edison invented the tinfoil phonograph. This is a good article in here. Right here.
Blah, 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 blah. Thomas Edison, tinfoil phonograph. Even after inventing it, people were skeptical about it. Even during demonstrations, people thought that he may have had a trick to it. It was new technology in an era where technology had not advanced very far. Can you blame people for being skeptical about it? You're using another example of things that has nothing to do with your argument for spirituality. You're giving these examples as a way to obscure the fact that you don't have proof of your position. Thomas Edison eventually proved his phonograph, and he did it in less time than it has taken you and believers in general to prove the existence of the spiritual. It happened within his lifetime, from the point that he invented the phonograph to the point where it was accepted. It was a very short period of time. Believers in any God have had thousands of years to explain and prove their claims. No one has succeeded thus far. Do you think that might be because there's nothing to prove?
And in this case, that was proof that came on demand. There are some other strange phenomena or strange things in this world that do not come on demand.
I can't wait to hear what examples you have for us.
I mean, not everyone who goes out there and prays is going to get the Dhamma. I mean, I'm a priest, and often a lot of people ask me, oh, can you give me a blessing, or can you show me the way? And I have to tell them the truth.
You tell them the truth? Well, there's a fucking first.
It's not up to me, it's up to a higher authority. The blessing doesn't come from me, it comes from a higher authority. And blessing or anything like this does not come on demand.
How convenient. When asked for proof, oh, it's not up to me. It's up to the higher authority. You pass the buck when it comes to proof. That way, you cannot be seen as the failure. Only the person you were talking to can be seen as the failure. Because if they don't believe hard enough, they don't experience it, and that falls on them. However, if they do pray hard enough, and they do experience it, suddenly you get showered with thanks. Thank you for showing me the way. You aren't interested in proof. You are not interested in reality. You are only interested in what strokes your ego off.
And so in the meantime, people who are inexperienced keep on rambling and raving and belittling spirituality and dismissing it as nonsense and just trash talking about it. I think this is also a character flaw, quite honestly. I mean, if you're comfortable in your view, your belief and all this, well, what's the point in writing a book like The God Delusion, which is literally nothing more than a litany of insults?
You have obviously not read The God Delusion, first of all. And second of all, what is the point of criticizing religion? Well, here in the United States, there's a majority of people who would impose their religious beliefs on everyone in this country. And that includes you, asshat. You're not a Christian. But see, what many of the Christians would like to do in this country is make their religion rule of law. And that's against the Constitution. Now, we can't effectively rail against people that want to do such things without railing against their motivations and justifications for doing them. If they truly believe that God himself has told them to subjugate the United States under Christian law, the only effective way to prevent them from trying to do so is to dismantle the strength of the belief in their religion.
Insulting, mudslinging, you should leave that to the politicians. I mean, it's a rather poor way to try and make yourself look better by comparison. It's also so typical of an insecure mind. I mean, if you're comfortable with your beliefs, well, why spend hours and months writing a whole litany of insults trying to belittle the opposing party?
How long did you take writing your book against atheism?
Yeah. So, people like this, those big shots on TV and all this, who trash talk about religion and spirituality and things like the magic of ancient Egypt, Ditama, they're just very inexperienced. They're not stupid, they're not even really ignorant, they're just inexperienced. They talk about religions, they talk about spiritual illuminations the same ways that this colorful character, Dr. Higgins, on My Fair Lady, talks about women.
Once again, I'm going to skip over this clip. You're doing the bit, never let a woman into your life from My Fair Lady, and it once again has absolutely no bearing on the subject you're actually talking about. It's just another distraction, smoke and mirrors, to try and make people forget about the fact that you're not saying anything.
Again, somebody like Dr. Higgins was definitely not stupid. He was very educated, he had many qualities, but he was very inexperienced when it comes to women, obviously. He did not experience the blessing of meeting the right person. That's why it helps to read your classics and understand better certain aspects of life instead of rambling and raving, saying that such and such is nonsense simply because you have not experienced it. In my next video, I'll talk more about the book I've written, which is about a person like one of these charming characters here. I don't know if I can find his picture. Is there a picture of him? Well, that's a charming character like this one, who does experience Ditama and finds out the hard way how wrong he was to scoff so bad at religion and spirituality for so long.
You wrote a novel about a character who's an atheist and then suddenly realizes that he's wrong. That's not going to convince anybody, because you can write things that aren't true in novels. Lord of the Rings was a novel. Does that mean Nazgul are real? Mordor's a real place? Harry Potter, The Wizard of Oz, Dracula, Frankenstein. All of these are novels. None of them really happened. None of them are based in reality. I'm starting to think maybe you aren't based in reality either.
So that's what I mean by shallow. And like I say, don't be impressed by their fancy jargon, their celebrity status, their eloquence and all this. No. Because they know what they're talking about doesn't mean they know everything. Because they're educated doesn't mean they're always right.
Says the person who tried to establish dominance during one of our first encounters by telling me just how educated you were. Hell of a double standard you hold everybody else to, isn't it?
And that still doesn't mean that they're experienced. There's no substitute for experience.
And as I've already said, I experienced the things you were talking about multiple times. And it's bullshit.
Whether it's, I don't know, like if you see a UFO up close, if you find an extraordinarily wonderful woman who changes your life, or for that matter, if you're blessed enough to experience Ditama, to experience spiritual illumination.
Did you just put spiritual illumination, falling in love, and UFO sightings into the same category?
In the meantime, other than that, you're just going to be making a fool of yourself, talking about things you know nothing about. The big shots in this magazine, they do a lot of that.
I'll be your volunteer.
Yet another pointless clip that you throw in. This time it's the one where Daffy Duck... You seem to have a thing for Daffy Duck, don't you? Anyway, it's the scene where Daffy Duck volunteers to be sawn in half by Bugs Bunny, and Bugs comes out and saws him in half, and he's telling the audience not to clap because it's a trick, and he's jumping up and down because he's so mad. He's got a split in his middle. And I'm assuming what you're saying here is that Bugs is you, the saw and the trick itself is spirituality, and atheists are Daffy Duck. And even when the proof is right in front of us, we don't want to admit it. You do realize that's a cartoon, right? Just like in a novel, it's not real.
It is worth mentioning that the young intellectuals I've interacted with on YouTube, because I met a lot of atheists on YouTube, they're even more shallow than the big shots on TV. I mean, they're not really worth talking about in detail here. I can only say they're more shallow than a puddle of water. One of them in particular was a very colorful character. He's the only one worth mentioning here. I call him Neon Noodle, quite simply because he was so easy to string along, poor guy. I mean, there's somebody who's just like most of these modern scholars and scientists and intellectual. He thinks he's so smart, but he's just so transparent and so easy to string along.
You're still carrying that string around. That's cute. See, I have a different hypothesis as to why you consider me to be the only atheist here on YouTube worth mentioning. And it has absolutely nothing to do with me being easy to string along, considering I've pretty much been in control of our interactions from the very beginning. Now, the reason you try and focus on me is because I wounded you. You didn't like what I had to say in my first video, and you haven't had any credibility since then. And you blame me for this. So you're trying to discredit me. I find that particularly amusing. But let's see what it is you have to say about me and my position that proves that I'm wrong. What kind of data do you have to back up your claim that I'm more shallow than a puddle of water and I don't know what I'm talking about? Let's see what you have to say about that.
Ironically, he himself provided me with what I needed to expose how clownish he can be.
Really? What, pray tell, was that?
And that's the way the cookie crumbles. In my next video, like I say, I'll talk more about this book I've written. It's going to be a while before I can publish it, but it's going to rock the atheist community, because it's going to expose how wrong one can be when he's inexperienced and talking about things he doesn't know about. Just as wrong as Dr. Higgins in My Fair Lady. That's the way the cookie crumbles. And that is it. Anat Sharak Amhotep, peace be with you.
A montage of my face? That's your argument about how foolish I can be? Some of those faces I was pulling for comedic effect. That's what I do. I make jokes. I make people laugh. It seems to be pretty effective most of the time. But, others? You caught me mid-word, and, anybody will look ridiculous if you pause them while they're saying something. See, the big difference between you and me is I have made several videos. Most of the videos that you took shots from weren't even aimed at you. But in each of those videos, I made arguments. I made points. Lots of them. And you obviously watched these videos in order to get all of these shots of me. Instead of making fun of my face, why didn't you address any of my points? The reason, quite obviously, is that you can't. Because no matter how smart you are, you never know if someone's going to come along and burst your bubble, debunk you. But towards the end of that video, you started talking about what you're going to do in your next video. You're going to talk about your book. Did you live up to that promise? Let's find out.
Hello, Mr. President.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Well, it's a beautiful day, and the wife is not home yet, so I thought I'd spend a few minutes just telling you what a clown you are and how tired I am of hearing your crap, basically.
Don't start none. Won't be none.
I remember back in the 70s, I had a teacher who was very irritated by the same student who kept on coming during each test telling him, well, I don't understand what an anticline is, I don't understand what the greatest stream is. That was in the class of geology I took way before you were even born. And I remember as a teacher always telling this clown, I explained it in class, I explained it in class, I explained it in class. Just like I explained to you that you should try this soap, see, it's much better. See, much better for your face. Might improve your looks.
Weren't you saying in the last video how sad it is when people try and use insults to make them look better?
Insulting, mudslinging, you should leave that to the politicians. I mean, it's a rather poor way to try and make yourself look better by comparison. It's also so typical of an insecure mind. And so you remind me so much of this clown out there who kept on hassling the teacher. Well, I've made my point. If you don't understand what my point is, that's your problem. What do I care?
Your point is that you have no proof that is your point. That's the exact point you just made. You started off by saying that you were going to rock the atheist community with this book of yours, with this argument of yours. And then you came out, and it turns out your argument is the same crap we've been hearing from believers of all stripes, and that is personal experience. And you yourself admitted that there is a difference between verifiable evidence and personal experience. So, as I said, put simply, your argument is you have no fucking argument.
And on an amusing footnote, also from a distant past, this is a cartoon character that I saw back in the 60s named Christ. And he reminds me of a friend of yours. Typical old country folk like this, old country guy who's very inhospitable to city folks. And life goes on. Grapes, anyone? It's much better than chocolate.
Was that your attempt at a dig on my Eats a Baby video? You really are reaching.
Arguing with people like you, it really is an exercise in futility.
Yet another Looney Tunes clip. Again, I get the feeling you think you're being Bugs Bunny in this, when in reality, you're the dog. Think about it. Comparing people to fictional characters, that's my bit. Talladega Nights in my first video towards you. Wimp Low in my second. You're biting my style, buddy, and you're hoping it makes you look good. Spoiler alert. It doesn't.
I feel sorry for my teacher so many years ago. I don't feel sorry for myself. I'm having fun interacting with a bonehead like you. Well, I hope your day goes well. And remember, this is the kind of soap you need. Hey, enjoy, big dog.
That was your next video. Where was any discussion of your book? Nowhere. As I've come to expect from you. Because you make these promises, and then you fail to deliver, time and time again. But that's not why this is most likely going to be the last time I address you. The reason is, I have a feeling you're going to be done soon. And not by choice. You see, as I said before, I've been involved in a few neo-pagan circles in my lifetime. And they all have the same problem in this country. Public relations. People in this country see people of other religions, particularly non-Abrahamic religions, and they think of them as devil worshippers. They think of them as evil, twisted, sinister in some way. They view them as cults. And so, groups like the Temple of Isis try their hardest to put forth a good public face. So they don't really particularly like it when people who claim to be representatives of their group go around and make them look bad, which is what you've been doing. And, well, remember when I said to keep it in mind that the person who issued your clergy card was Miss Vignier? I looked her up, found the official website for the temple out in California. I got the phone number for it, and I called up, curious to see if somebody in the office there could tell me what would happen to somebody who was a priest of Isis, who was going around and being as vulgar and threatening as you've been. This is what the woman on the other end of the line had to say.
So we can, if we can extricate somebody like that,
Now, the conversation with her continued, and she ended up giving me the email address for the temple and asked me to send along images, screenshots of our interactions and some of your comments and the language that you've used. And so this is what I sent to that email address. At the end of the conversation, I wanted to thank the person I was speaking to for their time. So I asked for their name.
Lorian Vignay.
That's right. I spoke to the head of your order, the person who granted you your priesthood, and I sent her these images. She responded. And here's what she said. Now, I know you don't really care for her. You made it pretty clear in one of your private messages to me. But that's still the head of your church, and your priesthood is still dependent on whether or not the board decides to not revoke your priesthood. So, enjoy being able to refer to yourself as a priest of Isis while you still can. And save the posturing, because you don't really scare me. I know you're going to threaten violence after this because it's the pattern that you follow. I know you're going to threaten. What are you going to do? Put the mummy's curse on me? Crap.